So we start the third lecture for today. Thank you joining us. So I saw that some other artists has joined us as well. And so I would like to present Mr. Claus from Germany. And yes, please, stage is yours and tell us about you shortly, and the lecture, what you will give, and it will take around 15 minutes, and then we have...
No, it's longer. It's a little bit longer.
Yeah, a little bit longer, and then we have possibility for questions also, so thank you.
Yes, thanks for your interest. With my little lecture, we are going into the past, but you know, the past is also connected with the present and with the future, so it's important to know what happened in the past to find new sources and to find your own way. And I'm raised up in East Germany, and the topic I'm talking about has to do with this fact. And as you know, in 1945, German history was splitted in two parts, and of course the film history also was splitted. And it's for historians, it's very interesting to compare these both lines of film history and on which ways maybe they are still connected because they are coming from the same roots. And if we talk about experimental films and animated experimental films, so Germany was a very important place. You will realize that my lecture is also connected with the other two lectures we had already here, because making experimental animation films is something what happens again and again, but in the very early film history, these steps have been steps by pioneers. And in Germany, I want to remember, was made the very first feature animation film in 1926, made by Lotte Reiniger, The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. And Lotte Reiniger was this female filmmaker who was connected with a whole group of filmmakers which all came from fine arts. And this group created in the middle of the 20s, during the silent movie area, the so-called utopia of absolute film. This was the parole of this group, the absolute film. And the names maybe you have heard already. Hans Richter, who made this very funny Dadaistic films in the beginnings of the 20s. Later he made abstract animation films, and he went also to the US and worked together with Marcel Duchamp and others, and he stayed in this kind of filmmaking. The other one is Oskar Fischinger, who also emigrated to the US and worked then for Disney, but in the same time he continued to make it his own fine art. And a very important chapter of his history is also the fact that he worked together with Fritz Lang in his Nibelungen film, this famous silent movie from the 20s. Another one is Walter Ruttmann, who made 1929 this the first of all city kaleidoscope movies, Berlin Sinfonie einer Großstadt. And in that film, this film begins, it's 1 hour long. It's really worth to be seen. And in the beginning, you have also an abstract film scene. And so in 1933, there was a break, of course, because the Nazis came to power. But this history of filmmaking continued in a perverted way, you can say. And Walter Ruttmann, this is really tragical, who was one of the most powerful and most courage artists in this group. He made propaganda films about tanks and weapons, and in those films, he also used parts of his experimental past, and also Leni Riefenstahl, the well-known female director who was very connected with Adolf Hitler, used tools and methods of experimental films. If you see Triumph of Power, this really horrible propaganda film about the Nazi party, you find also moments and parts of this tradition. So it's complicated and complex and not possible to explain it here in this little form, but it's important to point it. And 1945, as you know, the Soviets occupied the eastern part of East Germany, and from that on, we had these two lines of film history, and experimental film working in East Germany stopped. There was no continuum of this kind of filmmaking, because latest in 1952, this is the year, as in East Germany, the Stalinistic methods of so-called socialist realism was the totally the only tool you could use, and from this time on, it was absolutely impossible to make experiences on the field and experiments of unusual filmmaking. So, of course, but under the surface, it worked a little bit on. In the beginning, in the end of the 40s in Dresden, the studio for animation films was founded. And this is the reason also for the fact that we have now one of the most interesting short film festivals there in Dresden. Dresdner Filmfest is worth to be visited. You can watch very interesting films, short films from all the world, and also many animation films. And in Dresden, this Studio für Trickfilme, Trickfilm is the German name for animation film, produced continuously films, but just for kids. It was mostly 95% for kids and for children, and we have such a few films, short films, which were made for adult audience, and which films were made for cinema. And in Germany, in East Germany, many hundreds, maybe 1,000 short films were made, and again, around 90% of those films have been documentary films, propaganda films, and which films have been shown before the feature films in the cinema. So, and if you came to the cinema at first, there was some advertising. Also during socialist times, we had advertising, and then we had this newsreel, Wochenschau, and after the newsreel, normally a short film was being shown. And these films have been made in Dresden, but also in Berlin and in Potsdam. And after this whole program, you could watch the main film then. And this is a long tradition in Germany, and it stops in West Germany, it stops earlier in the 70s around, and in East Germany it continued until the end of the 80s. So we have this source of official made short films in East Germany. Of course, there are some interesting films in this heritage. It's worth to research it and to present it, but in the same time, an independently film scene developed. And this scene was very nearby the independent culturist scene, which was also known in the whole East Bloc as this Samizdat culture. It was not just filmmaking. Filmmaking was maybe the smallest part of this movement. the main parts have been literature, poetry, and fine art. And because it was so complicated to make exhibitions, for example, with unusual kinds of painting or sculptures, you exhibited with objects in private places. So in Russia, we have this name of apartment art, up art, and this was also usual in Germany, but very late in comparison with the other socialist countries, Soviet Union, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and independently art scene developed earlier in the 60s. And for example, in Poland, there was not such a harsh borderline between official filmmaking and underground filmmaking. If we remember on the films by Jan Lenica, for example, or Valerian Borovchik, those films have been made in official studios in Poland. This was not possible in East Germany. In East Germany, the official filmmaking was a closed society, and as somebody who came from outside, there was no chance to step in without very less expectation, very less people. I will show you something from this for this topic, and that's why if you want to make films and there is no official possibility to make films, you are looking for other possibilities, and this possibility means Super 8. Super 8 was available, you could buy it in the shops, the cameras and also the films, and so in the end of the 70s, mostly in Saxonia, there was a little group of painters and sculpturists who began to work with Super 8 to expand their work on paper and with other material to moving images. And there's one person who made no animation films, but it's important to hear his name or to know his name. Okay, it's yes, I can write it here on the yeah. Yes, this person was A.R. Penck, who began in the beginning of the 60s as a painter, and he became very successful, but in his case it's a totally paradox, because he became famous in the West, not in the East. In the East he was just known for a very small circle of friends in Dresden, and he made films together with friends and presented it with films only in private circles, and they made music, improvised music during showing with films, and I write his name. A.R. Penck, and he shared the fate of many artists from this circle. He tried to find some public spaces, and it was not possible. And he was so well known in the western part of Germany, and he sold his paintings to the West. Of course, this was forbidden. He didn't pay any taxes, and so the secret police came to him and said, "You have two choices: going to the prison or to the West." So, and he left East Germany and went to the West, to Cologne, and continued as a well-known artist there. And the group of friends he left back in Dresden was influenced by his very open-minded artistic work, and a part of this artistic work was working with Super 8. And so those artists began also to make experiments with this maybe ridiculous little film format, which was made for amateurs to to make films with the families and on Christmas, under the Christmas tree, and going to the holidays and so on. And they used this pure tool to try to find an own filming language. And this is now the point on which we are coming to animation films, because most of the members of this group all have been fine arts. We tried to use Super 8 as an expanded expression for their work, and maybe this is the moment to show the first example. And this film was made by Helge Leiberg, who was a very good friend of A.R. Penck, and who also later followed his master to the West, but later in 1984 he went to the West, and before he made some very interesting films. And the film we see, the beginning of that film, the title of the film is Action Situation, or in German Aktionssituation. And this film is very important because for the whole scene, because in this film you see, first you see some techniques, working with pencils and non-camera animation directly painted on the film. You must imagine 8 millimeters. Yes, it's a very, very small picture, and he worked with pencils and to paint directly on the film. But you see also in that film some colleagues of him, writers who are reading their poems, but you can't hear the text. So, but in that film you see this young man reading the poems, and this is the only film document you can see artists like this. So it's not just a very important artifact from art, it's also an historical artifact. Yes, please, let's start with, the music is also self-made in this film. This is the Dresdner Musikbrigade. So yeah.
Down to the stirring hay.
Yes, maybe it's enough to get an impression of this kind of filmmaking. And Helge had a camera which had the possibility to rewind, and so he could cut the film in the camera and could film the different layers. It's not made after the filming. It's all is made in the camera. So, and in his studio, he worked then later with pencils and scratching the film and so on. And of course, he edited a little bit. Very poor. Everything was very poor and very pure in the same time. Yes. Pardon? Super 8. Su 8 mm. Amateurfilmformat. Yeah, 8 mm. And so they tried something different. And I think this film looks really experimental. The phenomenon of this scene was that we didn't know the Western tradition of experimental filmmaking. It was not possible to watch films from the classic avant-garde, begin by Stan Brakhage or Andy Warhol or Kenneth Anger and so on. We knew the names, but we couldn't see the films. Yeah.
Did you have access to the movies made in Austria at the same time, like Gottren and Actionism?
Yes, but it was also a little bit earlier in Vienna. The performance artists by Hermann Nitsch and Otto Mühl and Kurt Krenn. Yes, it's also related. This is another phenomenon that all around the world, films like this have been made. Also in the Soviet Union. I realized it later that in Leningrad and in Moscow there have been groups in Moscow, the Parallel Neue Kino Club and Igor Alenikov, and in Petersburg, the necrorealists, and with Yevgeny Yufit and Boris Bezrukov and so on. And this is very interesting. They made it also without knowing what happens in the Western world. And we didn't know each other also in the East Bloc. Yes? It's a parallel phenomenon. So. But it has to do with the Super 8 medium. It's a primitive medium, and earlier or later you find the same methods. If you're trying to find something new, okay, so you work with the material itself. After the revolution in 1995 in Berlin, we founded an archive. The archive Ex Oriente Lux, the light from the east, in which archive we collected those films. And I contacted the friends who went to the West, and we got some money, a little bit money from the government to save this material. This is very important because we have been no copies. Each film was just one single film. And this means is the same film which have been in the camera, came back from the laboratory, and then it was positive. It was, of course, first negative. It's the reverse film method is the name of this. And so, and when you edited this, and when you projected the same film, and with each projection, of course, the danger was real that you destroy the films. And so that's why we founded this archive, to save the film in the state as they survived until this point. And I began, some of them I know personally because I made some films in that time too, in the 80s. But I'm younger. This group from fine artists, which began in the end of the 70s, have been born around the early 50s. This was the first generation of independent filmmakers in East Germany. The next generation, this is my age, we were born in the beginning of the 60s. So, but we knew each other and had also an exchange. And to get an impression of the different techniques, I want to show now an outtake of the next film made by Andreas Dress. And the title of the film is Zeichenfilm. Andreas Dress was also a painter, and he tried a completely different technique. He worked in his studio with a glass plate and with pencils, and he erased. He worked with stop motion, and he made, you can say, photographs of each single picture. And when he continued to working with the picture, and he erased some lines and added some lines, and he died last year, but he was a brilliant drawer. He made huge drawings, very filigrane, and the topics of his drawings always have been the individual in the urban space, and in German we say Entfremdung, the strangeness in the modern society. This was his big theme, and he used the music we have heard here was self-made by this Dresdner Musikbrigade, and Helge Leiberg was he played trumpet. He was a member of this music group, and Andreas Dress used another music. He used existing music. Maybe you will recognize it. Yes, we can show. There must be sound. Yeah. Yes, maybe it's enough. So you must know, Andreas Dress, for example, had absolutely no experiences with making films. So he had no teacher, he had no, of course, he watched films, but he had no advance in the techniques, and so he taught himself. So, and I think this is good work. In other films made by him, he is also he experiments also with real situations, with landscapes and so on, and he's painting on the landscapes and so on. And the fourth example I will show you is made by Christine Schlegel. She is also a member of this group. It was not a group with a concept or a manifest. It was a very open group, and members came and left. But in this film by Christine Schlegel, you hear the same music from the film by Helge Leiberg. So self-made music by pioneers of improvised music. The Dresdner Musikbrigade was the first free jazz group which made music without permission. So now it sounds strange, permission for music. Yes, in East Germany you needed permissions for everything in art. Yes, you had to write applications and to get a passport for artists, as an artist. And without this passport, you couldn't buy colors. And if this commission who give you the passport for making music didn't like the music, you couldn't make concerts. So you couldn't play in public music. So and the Dresdner Musikbrigade ignored this rules, and they made the music, and they had concerts, but mostly in private rooms and in art galleries, and also in the church. The church, the Lutheran church in East Germany, played a very important role for the independent art scene. Christine Schlegel was one of the few female artists in this underground scene, but it was connected, and you see in this film, in this 8-minute long film with the title Strukturen und Film, you see a very important person. This is a dancer, Fine Kwiatkowski, who was to be seen in many constellations, in performances, and also in films. She often was to be seen, and this is also a connection to the long tradition of avant-garde art in Germany, because Fine Kwiatkowski her master was Gret Palucca in Dresden, and Gret Palucca her master was Mary Wigman from the Bauhaus, and so this tradition continued to Fine Kwiatkowski and to those films. So and it's the point is the important historical point is that the artists here I'm talking about are a kind of reincarnation of the lost path of avant-garde art in Germany, in the eastern part of Germany. So, and in some points you can really find the connections, the bridges. So we can watch this film. It's important that the collaboration between Christine Schlegel, Okay, we can stop. Time is getting short, but I want to give you an impression to the film Anima by Lutz Dambeck, because this film, it's made in 1981, this is the only experimental animation film which was officially made in East Germany at all. It was shot on 35 millimeter, and Lutz Dambeck, he came from Leipzig and was a very important artist there. He founded also a group, and he he gets into the system. He had a mentor in the DEFA studio for animation film, and he was invited to make this film, Einmat, and after the film was finished, the head of the studio was horrified, and so the film was not forbidden, but it was not shown. So it was nobody could see it. It was known that the film exists, but in the cinemas he was never shown. So, and we see some minutes of the film. You hear also a little bit of text. This is a collage from propaganda films, just the sound and the pictures you see. This is also a collage. Let's start 5 minutes or so. Yeah. It's 15 minutes at all.
Kann es ebenso wenig geben wie eine Materie ohne Bewegung. Den verschiedenen Materien entsprechen in ihnen kommt die Entwicklung materieller Systeme als Prozess der Entwicklung vom Niederen zum Höheren und vom Einfachen zum Komplizierten als gesetzmäßiger Zusammenhang insofern zum Ausdruck als hierfür Unterscheidung existiert als ruhendes nur zeitweilig, während in ihnen selbst sich ständig quantitative Veränderungen vollziehen. Alle Ruhe, alles Gleichgewicht ist nur relativ.
Weil sie ihn liebt, wird sie ihn nicht verändern. Warum? Weil Liebe ein konservativer Trieb ist, sie. Das ist nicht wahr. Man muss die Kräfte nutzen, die im Welt sind. Nicht Geschwindigkeit danach. Einen Effekt zu haben, das wäre schön. Können Sie mir einmal antworten und einen Versuch vorschlagen, an dem man sich einmal in Ruhe darüber unterhalten kann?
Yes, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid we must stop now. But you got an impression of it, and you can understand that this film was not usual for children or for a feature film to be shown. But maybe you can recognize some details. It reminds me on Roland Topor, for example, a fantastic planet, and Lutz knew these films, and this is also homage, and it tried to get connected to the streams of modern movement. Yes, Mariam.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Really, it was. So it was nice travel in time back to those years, and it was really so informative. And thank you so much being with us. It's really an honor.